In 1823, a fur trapper named Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly bear on the banks of the Grand River in South Dakota. His scalp was hanging off, his back was torn open, his leg was broken. His own men left him for dead and stole his rifle. And yet Hugh Glass crawled 200 miles back to civilization. He survived by eating rotting buffalo carcasses, by drinking from muddy streams, and by a medical technique so disgusting that most modern doctors refuse to discuss it in polite company. It involved maggots. A lot of maggots. That is not even the weirdest thing mountain men did to stay alive. Between 1810 and 1840, the fur trappers of the American Rocky Mountains developed a survival toolkit that would horrify any modern wilderness instructor. They ate things that should have killed them. They wore clothes that never came off. And somehow, despite all of it, they outlived the civilized men back east by more than 2 decades. These are the forgotten survival skills that kept mountain men alive in the wild. Number 1. The gunpowder liver breakfast. When a mountain man killed a buffalo after 3 or 4 days of starvation in the Rocky Mountain wilderness, the first thing he did was not build a fire. He did not even butcher the animal. He tore the liver out of the body cavity with his bare hands and ate it raw. This was not a rare practice. It was the default behavior of almost every fur trapper in the 1820s and 1830s. A historian who studied their diet wrote that when mountain men had gone without meat for several days, all traces of Anglo-Saxon civilization vanished instantly. The liver came out bloody and unwashed. And then came the seasoning. Mountain men seasoned their raw buffalo liver with gunpowder. Yes, actual black powder from their rifle horns, sprinkled over the dripping organ the way you might sprinkle salt on fries. If gunpowder was not available, they squeezed the contents of the buffalo's gallbladder over the liver instead, coating it in thick green bile. The reason this worked is not mystical. Fresh liver from a healthy buffalo contains extraordinary amounts of vitamin A, iron, and B vitamins. For men burning over 6,000 calories a day in the freezing Rocky Mountains, that raw liver was rocket fuel. Their bodies craved it so violently that table manners became impossible. Number 2. The warm blood drinker. After the liver came the blood. Mountain men did not wait for the blood to pool or cool. They slit the throat of a wounded buffalo or elk and drank the warm fluid directly from the wound. A trapper with Captain Bonneville's party was documented slitting the throat of a wounded buffalo and drinking the blood as it sprayed onto his face and beard. The practice was so common, it had its own rationale. Some mountain men believed that drinking the blood of a fresh kill gave them the strength of the animal. Others just did it because they were starving, and the blood was the warmest thing available in a snow-covered valley. A pool of fresh buffalo blood on a freezing morning was a miracle. A few mouthfuls could stop the shaking in a man's hands for the rest of the day. The most extreme version of this came from the Plains tribes the mountain men lived alongside. After a kill, the warriors would reach inside the belly cavity of the buffalo with their bare hands and drink the blood that pooled around the lungs. Mountain men who spent years in the wilderness adopted many of these habits. The frontier had a way of erasing the line between civilization and survival, and that line kept getting thinner the longer a man stayed in the mountains. Number 3. Bitters, the gallbladder cocktail. A mountain man named Rufus Sage wrote extensively about a drink called bitters in his 1841 book, Rocky Mountain Life. The recipe is simple. You take 1 pint of water, you add 1/4 gill of fresh buffalo gall, the bitter yellow-green bile from a buffalo's gallbladder. You stir, then you drink it. Sage admitted that the first time you try bitters, it may cause vomiting. On the 2nd or 3rd attempt, he wrote, "The stomach accepts it. After that, you are supposed to enjoy it." Mountain men treated bitters as a combination morning coffee, multivitamin, and medicine. Sage claimed it restored impaired appetite and invigorated the digestive powers. Modern researchers actually believe he was onto something. Buffalo bile contains bile salts that help break down fats and may genuinely aid digestion in small quantities. Some trappers drank pure buffalo gall, straight with no water at all, claiming a man could get quite a glow if he took it on an empty stomach. Number 4. The wet buckskin body armor. Mountain men figured out that water plus buckskin plus sunlight equaled something close to primitive body armor. A trapper in dangerous country would take his deerskin overshirt and soak it completely in a cold mountain stream. He would wring it out. Then he would put it back on while it was still wet and let it dry in the sun while wearing it. As the wet buckskin shrank and hardened, it formed a stiff, rigid shell molded perfectly to the man's torso. A historian wrote that this created a veritable buckskin coat of mail that only the hardest-driven Indian arrow would penetrate. The hardened shirt would not stop a rifle ball, but it would blunt arrows, deflect knife slashes, and protect against spears and tomahawk strikes in close combat. The drawback was that the shirt became stiff and uncomfortable. A man wearing dried, hardened buckskin felt like he was wearing cardboard. Moving his arms meant cracking the stiffened leather. Mountain men accepted this trade-off. In country where a Blackfoot war party could appear out of a dry creek bed without warning, a stiff shirt was worth whatever it cost in comfort. Number 5. The anthill laundromat. Mountain men rarely bathed. A man could go 6 months without removing his buckskins in any meaningful way. The inevitable result was lice. Lots of lice. Entire colonies of them, crawling through seams and fringes and hair. Standard laundry techniques did not work in the wilderness. There was no lye soap. There was no hot water. So mountain men invented a delousing method that was simultaneously disgusting and genius. They used anthills. A trapper would take his infested shirt and spread it flat on top of an active anthill in the woods. The ants would swarm out of the hill, crawl over every inch of the fabric, and systematically hunt down and eat every louse and nit hiding in the seams. The ants were not interested in the man. They were interested in the protein crawling on his clothes. Within a few hours, the shirt would be completely deloused. Then the trapper would shake the ants off, put the shirt back on, and go about his day. The technique worked because wood ants are aggressive insect predators. A buckskin shirt covered in lice was a free buffet. If you are finding this interesting, hit subscribe. I cover forgotten history and survival lore every week. Now let me tell you about Hugh Glass and the maggots. Number 6. The maggot wound cure. In August 1823, Hugh Glass was hunting along the Grand River in present-day South Dakota with a party of fur trappers from the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. He rounded a thicket and came face to face with a female grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. The bear charged. Glass fired his single-shot musket and wounded the animal, but the bear reached him before he could reload. She slashed his scalp, tore open his back, broke his leg, and punctured his throat. His companions finally killed the bear with their rifles, but Glass was lying in the dirt covered in blood, his flesh hanging in strips from his bones. 2 men were left behind to bury him when he died. One of them was Jim Bridger, who would later become one of the most famous frontiersmen in American history. They waited several days. Glass did not die, but they got scared, stole his rifle, and left. When Glass woke up alone in the wilderness with no weapons and a body that was rotting from infected wounds, he faced a problem no doctor could solve. His back was turning green. The bacteria were spreading. Without antibiotics, without clean bandages, without anything, he was going to die of sepsis within days. So Hugh Glass did something that modern doctors now admit was medically sound. He crawled over to a rotting log that was swarming with maggots. He rolled onto his back. He let the maggots crawl into the open wounds. And he let them eat the infected, dead tissue out of his body. This is called maggot debridement therapy. It is a real medical treatment. Maggots only eat necrotic, dead flesh. They leave healthy tissue alone. As they feed, they also secrete antibacterial compounds that kill infection. Modern hospitals in the United States and the United Kingdom still use sterile medical maggots today to treat diabetic ulcers and infected surgical wounds. Glass discovered the technique in a dirt clearing in South Dakota in 1823, with no medical training, using nothing but rotting log maggots. After the maggots had cleaned his wounds, Glass began crawling east. He drank from streams. He ate raw berries, roots, and rattlesnakes. He was eventually befriended by a party of Lakota who helped him recover. Then he walked the remaining distance to Fort Kiowa, over 200 miles from where the bear had attacked him. He survived because maggots ate his back. Number 7. The greasy black uniform. Mountain men did not own multiple outfits. They owned one set of buckskins, and those buckskins stayed on their bodies for months or years at a time. The result was a piece of clothing that barely resembled leather anymore. A mountain man would wipe his butcher knife on his pants after every kill. He would wipe his greasy hands on his shirt after every meal. And he would wipe the blood off his fingers after skinning a beaver. He would spill bear grease on his chest while cooking. Over the course of a year, a mountain man's buckskin uniform turned into something else entirely. A writer named Barry described it perfectly. The leather became dirty black, greasy black, shiny black, bloody black, stinky black. Black. The buckskin became waterproof through sheer filth. Rain rolled off it instead of soaking in. Wind could not penetrate the layer of rendered fat. The fringes on the seams were not just decorative. They acted as tiny drainage channels that let rainwater drip off the garment instead of pooling on the fabric. Every design choice in a mountain man's outfit had a practical survival reason, even the ones that looked purely aesthetic. Number 8. Eating your own clothes. When the hunting failed and the snow came, mountain men ate the grease off their own gear. A starving trapper would start by scraping the rendered fat off his rifle stock. The stock had been rubbed down with bear grease for waterproofing, and a year of that grease added up to a few hundred edible calories. Next, he would cut the fringes off his buckskin shirt and boil them in water until the leather turned into a thick broth. Then he would eat his gun bags, which were also leather. If that was not enough, he went for the moccasins. A mountain man named Joe Meek described his own starvation journey in graphic detail. "I held my hands in an anthill until they were covered with the ants," Meek wrote, "then greedily licked them off. I have taken the soles off my moccasins, crisped them in the fire, and eaten them." Read that again. On Joe Meek stuck his hands into an anthill, let the ants swarm his fingers, and licked them off like a snack because he had nothing else to eat. Then he cooked his shoe leather over a campfire and ate that too. Number 9. The Castoreum cologne. Every mountain man carried a small container of a thick yellow-brown substance called Castoreum. It came from a gland near a beaver's tail, and it smelled like a combination of leather, vanilla, and something much worse. Castoreum had two uses. The first was bait. Beavers are territorial, and they mark their territory with Castoreum. A trap baited with the scent of another beaver would attract any beaver in the area. Mountain men would smear Castoreum onto twigs and place them above beaver traps hidden in the stream. The second use was far weirder. Mountain men rubbed Castoreum into their own clothing on purpose. The reason was that Castoreum masked the human scent. A trapper wading through a stream to set traps left behind a trail of sweat and body odor that warned every animal in the forest. But a trapper covered in beaver gland secretions smelled like a beaver. The deer and elk he was hunting did not run. The predators watching him could not easily place the scent. He became invisible to the wildlife around him. The downside was that Castoreum is oily and persistent. Once it was on a buckskin shirt, it never came off. The shirt now smelled like a beaver's rear end forever. A free trapper in 1835 probably smelled like grease, sweat, blood, wood smoke, tobacco, and fresh Castoreum all at once. To the animals, he smelled like part of the forest. To other humans, he smelled like something that had crawled out of a grave. Number 10. Shaving in the wilderness. Paintings from the 1830s show mountain men as wild, bearded figures who looked like they had never seen a razor. That image is almost entirely wrong. Real mountain men shaved. A Swiss artist named Rudolf Kurz painted mountain men throughout the 1840s, and almost none of them had beards. Another painter, Alfred Jacob Miller, attended the 1837 rendezvous at Horse Creek on the Green River in Wyoming and painted dozens of trappers. Only a tiny handful were bearded. The reason was not vanity. It was survival. Beards were lice condos. A thick beard on an unwashed face became a perfect habitat for fleas and body lice within a few weeks of winter camping. Keeping the face clean reduced the parasite load dramatically. And the second reason was diplomacy. Most Native American tribes, including the Blackfoot, Shoshone, and Crow, did not grow facial hair. The Crow called bearded strangers dogface. A trapper who wanted to trade with tribes kept his face clean because it made him less frightening. The ragged, wild-bearded mountain man of Hollywood movies is a myth. The real ones carried razors and used them regularly out in the freezing Rocky Mountain wilderness by the light of a campfire using cold stream water and no soap. Number 11. The quill feeding tube. Some of the most inventive mountain man survival techniques came from their Native American wives, who saved their husbands' lives on multiple documented occasions. The most extreme example involves a fur trader named William Bent, who ran Bent's Fort in what is now eastern Colorado. Sometime in the 1830s, Bent came down with a severe case of diphtheria. His throat swelled completely shut. He could not swallow water. He could not speak. He could not eat. Within a day or two, he would starve or suffocate. His Cheyenne wife saved his life with a hollow bird quill. She took a long, hollow feather shaft and forced it down Bent's swollen throat until it reached his stomach. Then she filled her own mouth with warm broth and blew the liquid through the quill directly into Bent's stomach, the way you would blow through a straw. She repeated this several times a day. She kept her husband alive through pure bioengineering, improvised at a remote trading post. Then a Cheyenne medicine man arrived and did something even stranger. He collected several small sandburrs, each covered in tiny sharp barbs. He tied thread-sized sinew to one of the burrs. He rolled it in marrow grease to make it slippery. And then he forced the sandbur down Bent's throat. The barbs on the sandbur ripped open the swollen diphtheria membrane in Bent's throat as the medicine man pulled it back out with the sinew thread. It was a primitive surgical procedure using a plant and a string. It worked. The infection drained, Bent could breathe again, and he lived for decades after. Number 12. Pemmican with a side of sticks and sand. The final item on this list is a food that kept mountain men alive for months at a time. It was called pemmican. The textbook version sounds almost reasonable. Dried meat, dried berries, and rendered fat, all pounded together into a dense bar that could be carried in a leather bag for months without spoiling. The original protein bar. But the real pemmican that mountain men actually ate in the field was nothing like that. A naturalist named Robert Kennicott, who traveled extensively with fur trappers, wrote one of the most honest descriptions of pemmican ever recorded. Pemmican is supposed by the benighted world outside to consist only of pounded meat and grease, Kennicott wrote. An egregious error, for I am authorized to state that hair, sticks, bark, spruce leaves, stones, sand, and so on enter into its composition, often quite largely. Read that again. Real pemmican contained hair, sticks, bark, spruce needles, actual stones, and sand. The reason was simple. Pemmican was made outdoors, in a camp, by men using stone tools and hide bags. Every step of the process picked up contamination. Pounding dried meat on a flat rock added stone fragments. Mixing the meat with fat in a buffalo hide bag added hair. Drying berries in the sun added twigs and insects. The final product was about 80% food and 20% forest floor. Mountain men ate it anyway, often for weeks at a time, because the alternative was starving to death. These are the forgotten survival skills that kept mountain men alive in the wild between 1810 and 1840. They drank bile and blood. They ate their own pants. They let maggots crawl into their wounds. They did laundry with insect colonies. And somehow, despite all of it, they lived longer than the civilized men back east who had doctors, clean water, and soap. The frontier did not reward the squeamish. It rewarded the practical. If you want to see more forgotten history like this, the video on screen right now goes even deeper into the weirdest survival stories of the American frontier. Click it, and I will see you in the next one.